McNabb, CSC RFD, and Janice, Brigadier Peter Smith, MBE RFD ED, and his son Brad, Brigadier Rod Hamilton, CSM RFD, patron of the 9th Battalions Association, Colonel Chris Austin, President of the 9th Battalions Association, and also Vice Chair of QACAC. I'll explain QACAC later, if you don't mind. It is important to us, but it'll take me too long at the moment. Colonel Mark Platt, Chairman, 9th Battalion's Museum Trust. Lieutenant Colonel Luke Hughes, Commanding Officer of the 9th Battalion, Royal Queensland Regiment, and Margaret. The Honourable Wayne Swan, MP, Federal Member for Lilly. Mr Adrian McCabe, Director, Client Access and Support, Department of Veterans Affairs, Queensland, representing the Deputy Commissioner. Councillor Fiona King, Councillor for the Marchant Ward of the Brisbane City Council. Mr Peter Saxon, representing the Kedron-Wavell sub-branch of the Return and Services League of Australia. Other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the official opening of the first Ashore display, a display dedicated to the men who formed the 9th Battalion of the Australian Imperial Force, whose members were the first to land at Gallipoli and who then went on to fight on the Western Front in the War to End All Wars from 1914 to 1918. The display is a display in two parts. Firstly, a static display which you will see here today and which will be open to the public from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. every Monday and Sunday from the 7th of September next until the end of next year. The second part of the display consists of a series of 7 lectures about the 9th Battalion heroes we feature in the static display and which will be held here on Sunday afternoons between April and September next year. Further details of those lectures will be available before the end of this year. In 2013, I was privileged to be appointed Chair of the Anzac Centenary Committee for the Federal Electorate of Lilly. From that committee's assessment of numerous applications, the federal member made a number of recommendations to the Department of Veterans Affairs regarding the distribution of Anzac Centenary local grants. One of those recommendations resulted in a substantial grant to the 9th Battalion's Museum Trust, and I would now like to welcome that federal member to address us here this morning. Would you please welcome the Honourable Wayne Swan MP, Member for Lilly.
Well, thanks, Pat, and could I convey my personal thanks for all of the hard work that you and your committee did, putting forward some very, very worthy proposals which have now come together in displays such as this one today. Could I also acknowledge Brigadier McNabb and all of the other invited guests here today. As Pat said, this was the 9th Battalion was the first ashore at Gallipoli, and I believe this is a very moving tribute to the 9th Battalion. It was also the 1st Battalion recruited in Queensland for the Great War. So not only first ashore, but also the first recruited. And it remained at Gallipoli until the evacuation in 1915. It then served on the Western Front, fought at Ypres, along the Hindenburg Line, and participated in the Great Allied Offensive in 1918 at Amiens. The 9th lost 1,128 men of the 60,000 who died in the Great War. In those Western Front battles, the 9th fought alongside the 41st Battalion, which was my grandfather's battalion. He received serious wounds at Ypres, was gassed for the second time at Milne Court in the Somme Valley. He was one of the 156,000 wounded in the Great War. These men were changed forever by the hardships they faced and overcame. The wounded, many unable to return to their jobs when they came home, were soldier settlers, like my grandfather. Stretched by the hard land they battled to tame. Last year, I was sitting in my office over at Nunda and I received an Australia Post package. And as I opened it, these medals fell out. These medals were returned to me by a collector and of course identified because my grandfather's name is engraved on the side, as it is with all medals. But it was the note that was attached to the medals that really was very moving. He said he had picked them up a long time ago at an antique shop. He felt with the centenary coming up, he had hundreds of medals, these were just two. He was going to do his best to return them to as many of the relatives as possible. And he had identified my name with my grandfather. But he said this in the note. He said, speaking of the medals, they all have a man with a story behind the name impressed upon them. They're fantastic pieces of history and they mean a great deal to me. They were all great men. Of course, they were all great men. And they're all represented here today in the medals that are proudly worn by our servicemen here today. And they, more than anything else, the medals of the departed, the medals worn proudly by our servicemen and women today, signify why this centenary is so important. The medals, along with this display behind us here today, remind us that they could have been our grandparents, and importantly in this locality, they could well have been our neighbours. The 9th Battalion, still based today at Gallipoli Barracks, was formed here, as we said before. Within weeks here on the north side, literally hundreds of people were leaving their homes wanting to fight in the war. Locals turned out on the north side of Brisbane, as they did across our great city, in huge numbers. By 1916, here in Chermside, 2,400 men were in a training camp located in this area. So it's particularly fitting today that this display is located in the old Sandgate Drill Hall, which I think is 100 years old this year, and moved here as part of the Australia Remembers program 20 years ago in 1995. The movement of the hall here, as with this display today, comes from a lot of hard work from a lot of service people here locally, but none more so than Pat O'Keefe, who was very much involved with that 20 years ago. And as Pat well knows, it was a battle, an epic battle, to actually get the drill hall out of Sandgate, let alone in to Chermside. But the wisdom of that decision is here for all to see today, utilised now, once again, to commemorate the centenary. This display pays respects to the resilience, the courage, the resolve, and the loyalty of all of those who risked their lives or lost their lives for the country that they loved. It teaches us a lot about ordinary people. And as Prime Minister Keating said back in 1995, the lesson of the Great War is that ordinary people are not ordinary. They're truly extraordinary and do extraordinary things in difficult circumstances. And it's also appropriate that we're here again today because in the Second World War, the 9th Battalion was again at the centre of an epic battle, first into Gallipoli and then at the centre of the Battle of Milne Bay. As we all know, arguably a very big turning point in the Pacific War. And again this year, 70th year of victory in the Pacific, or victory against Japan. And to have this display in the Milne Bay Centre makes it all the more fitting and all the more appropriate. So our forebearers represented here today, and those that have all fought in subsequent conflicts all the way through now to Afghanistan and Iraq, they fought for fundamental principles, principles that form the bedrock of our modern democracy, the principle of justice, the principle that nations that trample on the rights of others must be resisted. And underlying this universal principle is the notion and pursuit of equality, that one person is as good as the next. Our ideal always has been and always will be no master, no servant, just individuals bound together as equals. What the men of the 9th Battalion believed was this: that a nation founded on the universal principle of equality is a nation worth fighting for. The men of the 9th Battalion proved this at Gallipoli, and this display reminds us of our national story. A story about being there for others when they need help, no matter who they are or where they are. It's about defending everybody's right to pursue their own small patch of equality. So thanks go to Pat and his committee for this moving tribute to the 9th Battalion. Thank you.